She asked it in the parking lot of a funeral home in Cookeville, Tennessee, on a Thursday morning in March. She was 78 years old, and she was wearing her good black coat, the one she kept for occasions, and she was standing beside a car she had driven 22 miles alone, and she was looking at the door of the funeral home the way a person looks at a thing they have been dreading for a long time and have finally arrived at and cannot make themselves walk through. He was a stranger. He had parked his motorcycle 2 spaces over, and he was pulling off his gloves when she spoke, and what she said was so quiet and so specific and so impossible that he thought for a moment he had misheard. "Will you be my son just for today?" He looked at her. She was still looking at the door. Her hands were clasped in front of her, with the particular stillness of someone holding themselves together through the force of will and not much else. And she did not look at him when she asked it, because she could not look at him. Because looking at him while she asked it would have made it real in a way she was not yet sure she could bear. He did not say anything for a moment. She looked at him then. Her eyes were dry. She had been doing the crying in the car. He could see that. The particular careful composure of someone who has spent the drive over getting it out so they could walk in. She looked at him with the directness of a woman who has lived long enough to stop being embarrassed by what she needs. She said it again. "Just for today. I won't ask anything else of you. I just can't go in there alone." He stood in the parking lot of a funeral home in Cookeville, Tennessee, on a Thursday morning in March, and he understood, in the specific way that certain things are understood before they can be explained, that this was not a thing he was going to walk away from. He tucked his gloves in his jacket. "Yes, ma'am," he said. What happened over the next 7 hours, and what he told his chapter that night, and what the chapter did the morning after, would move through the Brotherhood like something that needed moving, the way certain truths move through men who have been carrying them without knowing they were carrying them. Cookeville sits on the Cumberland Plateau in Putnam County, Tennessee, a town of 35,000 between the eastern mountains and the western flatlands, partaking of both without fully belonging to either. In March, the plateau is still winter at night and trying to be spring in the afternoons, and the mornings split the difference, cold at the edges, pale in the light, the sky not yet committed to blue. The Cumberland County Veterans Cemetery sat 3 miles north of the funeral home, on a rise above a small creek, with flags along the entrance road that moved in the morning wind, with the gravity of things that know what they mark. The funeral home had been on Main Street since 1948. It had the quiet authority of a building that has done one thing for a long time, and done it well enough that the town trusts it with the worst mornings of their lives. The parking lot held 12 cars. At the far end, 2 spaces from a motorcycle, a black Lincoln Continental that the funeral director knew. This was not Geneva's first time here. Doyle Meacham had died in his sleep on a Saturday night in February at 81 years old, after 54 years of marriage that had included 3 moves, 2 children, 4 grandchildren, and the particular faithfulness of a man who had been present for all of it, the thin years and the loud years with small children and the quiet years after, which they had had to learn together. He had been, in all the ways that counted, exactly where he was supposed to be. She was burying him today. She had been preparing to do this alone since the first week of February, when she understood that it was going to have to be done alone, and had begun steeling herself the way she steeled herself for hard things, by going quiet, and by going inward, and by not telling anyone how hard it actually was. Her son's name was Kevin. He lived in Phoenix, far but not impossibly far. He had called the Saturday they found Doyle. He had called again Monday. He had said, "Mom, I don't know if I can get there." Work is, and she had said, "It's all right, Kevin," because she had learned over many years that telling him what she needed cost her more than telling him it was fine. He had sent flowers. She had put them in the back of the car to take to the church on Sunday, because having them in the house was a specific kind of company she could not sustain. She had a daughter too, Marlene, in Murfreesboro, 90 miles west. Marlene had come and stayed a week, and Geneva had told her to go, genuinely, not the performance of it, but the real thing. Geneva had enough in her to get through Thursday. She had gotten through harder. What she had not counted on was the parking lot. She had driven the 22 miles with both hands on the wheel, no music, the silence doing the work the drive required. She arrived at 8:55. She sat in the car for 4 minutes, 3 longer than she planned. She put on her coat, picked up her purse, opened the door. She stood in the parking lot and looked at the entrance and understood that she could not make herself walk through it. Not alone. Not for this specific thing, with the March wind off the plateau and Doyle on the other side of that door in a way he had never been on the other side of a door before. The motorcycle had been there when she pulled in. The man getting off it was large. She registered that first. And the coat with the patches, and the gloves he was pulling off with the unhurried efficiency of someone who has spent a long time in all weathers. She had looked at him for a moment. She had thought, he is someone's son. Then she had thought something else. And then she had said it before she could stop herself, because stopping herself had already cost her the car and the parking lot and everything she had, and she had nothing left to stop herself with. Before we hear what happened when they walked through that door together, drop your city in the comments. Your city, your state, anywhere in the world you're watching from right now. I read every single one. Hit subscribe so you never miss the next story. To anyone who has ever stood outside a door they needed someone to help them through, this one is for you. Stay with us. His name was Cord Harlan. He was 52 years old, out of the Upper Cumberland chapter, 6'3", broad through the chest, with the kind of face that had been outdoors for most of its life, weathered in the way that is different from aged, specific in the way that is different from old. He had a scar along his right hand from a piece of sheet metal in 1999, and a stillness that people sometimes described as intimidating until they were close enough to see his eyes, which had the quality of someone who had made peace with serious things and come out less hurried than before. He had been riding from Monterey, Tennessee, 15 miles east, heading into Cookeville to pick up a part for a bike he was rebuilding for a man in the chapter who had been sick the past 6 months and could not do it himself. That was all. A part pickup on a Thursday morning. He had not planned to stop at the funeral home. The funeral home had a parking lot with space, and he had pulled in to consult the address on his phone because the parts store was on a street he did not know the cross street for. He was looking at his phone when the woman in the black coat got out of the Lincoln. He was not watching her deliberately. He was watching the way he watched everything, peripherally, continuously, the particular ambient attention of a man whose life had required him to know what was in a room before committing to a direction. He watched her stand at her car door. He watched her look at the entrance of the funeral home. He watched her look the way a person looks when they are asking themselves whether they have enough left to do what they came to do. He had seen that look before. He had worn that look before. He was still watching when she turned and looked at him. He had put his phone away before she spoke. He had put it away because he already knew he was going to stay. He held out his arm. She took it. They walked through the door together. The service lasted 40 minutes. Cord sat beside Geneva in the front row of the chapel, which was the row she had dreaded most, because the front row was where the family sat, and she was the family, and the front row required receiving the condolences of everyone who came to pay them, and she had not been sure she could receive condolences for 40 minutes without the composure she had spent the drive over assembling coming apart. Entirely. Cord sat in the front row beside her, and he did not look out of place. He looked like someone who was exactly where he was supposed to be. She introduced him to 3 people as a family friend. He shook their hands, and he said what people say. A good man, from what I understand. She speaks of him with a great deal of love, which he said because it was true, based on the 8 minutes he had spent walking from the parking lot to the chapel, during which Geneva had told him about Doyle in the careful way she had learned to speak about him since February. Taking pieces of the man and offering them one at a time, so the weight of the whole was not what she was carrying in any single moment. He had listened to all of it. He knew, by the time they sat down, that Doyle Meacham had taken his wife dancing on their anniversary every year for 54 years. Not always somewhere fancy, sometimes just the living room, which Geneva said was better, because there was no one there to watch them not be as graceful as they once were. He knew that Doyle had made the coffee every morning of their marriage, because Geneva's coffee was bad, and Doyle had told her this in the first week, and she had said, "Then you make it," and he had never stopped. He knew that Doyle had learned to use a smartphone at 78, because his grandchildren were on it, and he wanted to be where they were, which Geneva said was the most Doyle thing Doyle had ever done. He sat beside her in the front row, with this man he had never met already inside him, the way people you have truly listened to enter you and stay. When the minister spoke, Cord looked forward. When the music played, he did not close his eyes the way some people close their eyes during music in chapels. He kept his eyes open. He was present in the specific way that presence is a practice rather than a feeling. Geneva did not cry during the service. She had done the crying in the car. What she did instead, twice, was put her hand on Cord's arm, briefly, lightly, not seeking comfort exactly, just confirming that he was still there. Both times he was. Both times he let it rest without moving, which was the correct response. When the minister said amen, Geneva said amen in the voice she used in church, which was clear and full, in the voice of a woman who meant it. And Cord said amen beside her, because he did. The graveside service was at the Veterans Cemetery 3 miles north. They drove in a small procession, the hearse, Geneva's Lincoln, 3 other cars. Cord rode behind the procession on his bike, which he had not planned. But the parking lot of the funeral home and the parking lot of the cemetery were the same distance, and he had not made the parts pickup call yet. And he was not going to make it yet. The flags moved in the March wind along the entrance road. The graves were set on a rise above the creek, and from where Geneva stood she could see the water below through the bare trees, which was a thing Doyle would have pointed at. She knew that. And knowing it cost her the composure she had saved from the service, and she let it cost her, because there were no more rooms to save it for. She wept. She wept quietly, the way she did everything, with the dignity of a woman who had not been given easy things, and had met them each with the best of what she had. Cord stood beside her in the March cold with his hands at his sides, and he did not put his arm around her, because that was not what she needed. He stood close enough that she could feel his presence, and far enough that she had room to grieve in the way she needed to grieve. The minister said the words. The flags moved. The creek made its small sound below the bare trees. When it was done, one of the soldiers folded the flag. He walked it to Geneva. He held it out to her with both hands and said, "On behalf of a grateful nation." Geneva took it, and she held it the way the soldier had held it, with both hands level, the way it deserved to be held. And she said thank you in the voice she saved for things she meant absolutely. Cord watched all of this, and he did not speak. On the drive back to the funeral home's parking lot, she was going to the church reception. He had told her he would follow. Geneva was quiet for a long time. He rode behind the Lincoln with the particular attentiveness of someone who understands that the person in the car ahead of them is driving on grief rather than focus. In the parking lot, she sat in her car for a moment. He waited on the bike. She got out. She walked to him. She said, "You have a mother?" He said had. "She's been gone 11 years. Geneva looked at him. "She raised a good son," she said. Cord looked at the flags above the entrance road, still moving in the wind. He said nothing for a moment. "I haven't always been," he said. "Nobody always is," she said. "Doyle wasn't always either. That's not the measure." He looked at her. "What's the measure?" he said. She thought about it for a moment. "Whether you showed up when it mattered," she said. They were quiet. "Today mattered," she said. He nodded. She held out her hand. He shook it, which was not quite the right gesture, and both of them knew it, and neither of them had a better one, and so it stood for what it was. She got back in the Lincoln. She drove to the church. He sat in the parking lot for a long time. He called his road captain at 2 in the afternoon. His name was Pete Barrow, Upper Cumberland chapter, and he answered on the second ring. Cord told him what had happened. He told it plainly, the way he told everything, without performance, without editorializing. Just the sequence of events from the parking lot to the graveside to the two of them talking beside her car. The question she had asked in the parking lot. Just for today, what it had cost her to ask it. What it had told him about the kind of morning she had already had before he pulled in. He told Pete what she had said about her son in Phoenix. He told Pete what she had said about the measure. Pete was quiet for a long time after Cord stopped talking. "Her address," Pete said. "Why?" Cord said. "Just give me the address," Pete said. Geneva Ruth Meacham arrived home at 4:15. The church reception had been warm and full of the specific comfort of casseroles and people who had known Doyle for 30 years, saying true things about him. And she was tired in the way you are tired after a day that has required everything. She pulled into her driveway, sat for a moment, went inside. She had been inside 40 minutes when she heard the engines. She heard them from the kitchen where she had put on the kettle. Muffled first, then clarifying, then unmistakable. She went to the window. The street in front of her house was filling with motorcycles. They came from the direction of the highway in a formation that took the width of the road and parked along the curb with the deliberate purpose of people who have decided where they are going and have arrived. She counted to 30 and kept watching. 53 motorcycles. Every engine killed. The street held the most silence it had known all day. A man came to her door. He was not Cord. He was older, gray-haired, with the bearing of a chapter president, and a face that had organized hard things for a long time. He held in both hands a small covered dish, a casserole, she could tell from the weight of it. He said, "My name is Pete Barrow. Ma'am. We heard it was a hard day." Geneva looked at him. At the dish, at the street full of motorcycles and the men and women beside them, standing in the afternoon cold. She said, "How did you know where I live?" "A brother of ours spent the morning with you," Pete said. "He called us." She looked at the street for a long time. "He didn't have to do that," she said. "No, ma'am," Pete said. He didn't. He held the dish a little closer, not pressing it, just offering. "We've all lost somebody," Pete said. "We know what today costs." Geneva stood at her door for a moment. She said, "Come in, then. I'll make tea." They did not all come in. 53 people in a small house on a quiet street in Cookville would not have served the thing Pete understood was needed, which was not a crowd, but a presence. The knowledge, felt through the walls and the windows, and the sound of 53 people breathing in the cold air outside, that a woman who had buried her husband was not alone on the street where she lived. 12 of them came in. The rest stood with their bikes. Some of them talked quietly. Some of them did not. The couple at the end of the block came out onto their porch and stood looking. A woman across the street came to her window. A man 3 doors down walked out to the sidewalk and stood with his arms crossed, not speaking, looking at the formation the way a man looks when he is deciding whether something is real. Inside, Geneva made tea for 12 people in a kitchen that had made tea for 2 for 54 years. And she found the cups she had not used in months. And she set out the cookies that had been in the back of the pantry since Christmas, because Doyle had liked them and she had not opened them since. And she talked about Doyle with 12 people who had not known him, and who listened to everything she said with the specific quality of attention that people give when they understand they are receiving something they will carry. She told them about the dancing, the living room in the later years, when they were not as graceful. She told them about the coffee. She told them about the smartphone, and the grandchildren, and the reason he had learned it, and several of the 12 laughed at that, and she laughed too, and it was the first time she had laughed in 6 weeks. Pete Barrow sat across from her at Doyle's side of the table, which no one had sat in since February, and he did not know this, and she did not tell him, but she was glad someone was in it. At one point, she said, "I asked a stranger this morning to be my son for a day." She said it the way you say something when you are far enough from the worst of it to look at what you did. He came. I don't know what I would have done if he hadn't. Pete said, "He's like that." She said, "What's his name?" His full name. Pete told her. She said it once. She put it somewhere she intended to keep it. Cord Harlan never came inside that afternoon. He had gone to pick up the part. He had called ahead, apologized for the delay, picked it up at 3:30, and he had ridden to the chapter house and delivered it, and sat with the man who was sick for an hour, quietly, without much said. He had not gone to Geneva's street, because he had already been where he was supposed to be that day, and the chapter being there was the right continuation of it. He heard about the casserole and the tea and the 12 people in the kitchen from Pete at 9 o'clock that night. He heard that she had laughed. He sat with that for a long time. He thought about his own mother, gone 11 years. The things he had and had not done in the years before she was gone. He thought about Geneva's answer to his question, whether you showed up when it mattered. He had not always. He knew that. He carried it the way you carry things that are true and cannot be changed, steadily, as structure, not emergency. Today he had shown up. He called Pete back. He said, "Thank you for going." Pete said, "Thank you for calling." That was all that needed saying. Geneva Meacham kept the flag on the mantel. The American flag, folded by the soldier's hands and delivered with both of his, on behalf of a grateful nation. She kept it beside the photograph of Doyle in his army dress uniform, taken in 1966, the year before she met him. She wrote a letter, 2 weeks after the funeral. She wrote it by hand because she wrote all letters by hand, in cursive, because she believed a letter written by hand carried something that a typed one did not. She addressed it to Cord Harlan, Upper Cumberland chapter, and she mailed it to the address Pete had given her over the phone. The letter said, "Dear Cord, I did not know your name when I asked you to be my son. I knew your face, and I knew you were someone's child, and I knew I was out of time for anything else. What you did that morning and what your brothers did that evening is not something I have the right words for. So I will say the plain thing instead. You gave me back my dignity at the moment I was most afraid of losing it. Doyle would have liked you. He had a way of knowing, immediately, which men were the real thing, and you are. Thank you for saying yes. Geneva Meacham." Cord read it twice. He folded it and put it in the inside pocket of his cut, against his chest. which was where he kept things he intended to carry for a long time. He still has it. She asked a stranger to be her son for a day because she had run out of everything else. She had run out of composure, and she had run out of time, and she had run out of the particular stubbornness that had gotten her through every hard thing before this one, and what was left was a question, and a parking lot, and a man getting off a motorcycle. She asked. He said yes. And the yes traveled through a chapter the way certain things travel. Quietly, fully, changing the men it passed through in ways that none of them had the language for immediately, but that all of them felt, and that several of them carried home to their own mothers and their own daughters and their own families, and did not explain, but simply expressed through whatever small version of showing up their specific Tuesday offered them. That is what a chapter is for. Not the rides, not the patches, not the road. Those are the surface of it. Underneath, a network of men and women who have agreed, in the particular unspoken way that certain agreements are made, that when someone runs out of everything else, they will not be out of them. Geneva Meacham was not out of them. She never would be again. If this story reached you, if you believe that showing up when it matters is the measure of a person, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you never miss the next one. And drop a comment below. Tell me about someone who showed up for you when you needed it most. Tell me their name. I read every single one. And today, I want to hear about them.